Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I've been going out with a girl, her name is Julie, but last night she said to me when we were watching telly.
How can that be? James in Castleford, hello.
Hi there. I'd just like to ask, what happens to the human right to life? And if you could argue that abortion is taking away the human right to life, so that maybe
people do argue that.
Yeah, so maybe that's breaking the rules, and you should step in to stop abortions happening. It's against human rights.
Well, you're going back to the fundamentals of the argument here, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. So you're saying, should we interfere in Ireland? Perhaps if Ireland decided that they wanted to liberalise the abortion, maybe we should then step in, take it back, because it's violating human right to life.
Well, that's not likely, is it? It's not realistic of you to suggest that, James,
No,
given what the law is in the UK.
Yeah, I know that, but I think if people are going against human rights, then that will be the point where you step in.
So you're against abortion, are you, in any circumstances?
I wouldn't say that myself, but I can see the argument that there's human right to life, and that if you're committing an abortion, you're taking away that life. So if people are doing that, you're flying in the face of human rights. So perhaps then that will be the point where you'd step in. If you were going to interfere in someone else's politics in a different part of the country.
But James, I mean, forgive me, but I feel like I'm talking to you in 1965.
What do you mean?
Well, because I'm not saying we can't have discussions about the rights and wrongs of abortion. I don't think it will ever be a completely settled conversation, will it? But the settled policy, legal will of this country is to provide abortion services for people.
I'm not actually saying that abortion's right or wrong, but I'm saying if you're going by human rights, and there's a human right to life, then perhaps you should only interfere in someone else's jurisdiction if they're flying in the face of that.
OK, James, thank you very much indeed for your call, James. Calling from Castleford. David in Croydon, hello.
Oh, hi, Sheila. It's nice to speak with you again. Forgive me for speaking ill of the dead, truly, but why are we not rejoicing? If this was Winston from Brixton or Sherelle from Tottenham found dead with a crack pipe in their hands, would we be speaking this way?
Well, I would be, David, and I'm not going to carry on the conversation with you, I'm afraid, because 2 young people have died, and we shouldn't be rejoicing. So no, we shouldn't be rejoicing. And I wouldn't rejoice if any young person dies taking drugs.
I'm going to go to Susanna in Sidcup, who's a new caller to the show. Good evening, Susanna.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, Nigel, for having me on. First of all, can I just say something which I wasn't planned to say? About elections quickly in the UK, that scares me, because if Jeremy Corbyn gets elected, Jeremy Corbyn, he doesn't care about the UK. All he cares about is to get to 10 Downing Street, and he will sell us to the EU like all the Labour government has done before him.
Well, Susanna, Susanna, although, Susanna, to counter that, you could argue that Jeremy Corbyn himself had for 33 years, as a backbench Labour MP, been himself a Eurosceptic.
Yeah, but he hasn't got a backbone to stand for. He presents himself as the man to stand for principles. So why is he not standing for principles where the EU is? Because he knows he wants to get to 10 Downing Street regardless.
Because of his parliament. So is there a potential sellout, Susanna, in this country and in Italy simultaneously?
Yes, and going back to Italy, because that was my initial. It's only when the last text you mentioned.
That's all right. That's
an election in the UK, because that is what scares me. Because, like I said, I honestly feel the Labour will sell us as long as they get into power. Period. Okay. They don't care.
To Italy.
Even though it's God knows how many times against all the EU's legislations, etc. As for the Italians, I would be fuming. I'm actually Maltese, been here 21 years, voted for Malta to get into the EU. If there was a referendum now, I would vote for Malta to go out. We have seen migrations and stuff in the UK, but what has been going in the Mediterranean, you know, Nigel, but I'm afraid a lot of the media in the UK never covered it. All the boats going over the Mediterranean both settling in Lampedusa, Malta, and Italy mainly. Italy has suffered big time. The EU, in the power that they could help, they did not help, period. Those things were not covered in the British media 15 years ago. I was here, but I was also going out there often, and I knew exactly what was happening. And the lady in Como, I've been to Como last year. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. But has she not seen what's been happening in Italy in the last 10 years, 20 years? What about the lost generation the Italians have had? How many of them had to leave their country because of those jobs going?
Well, that's right.
When they joined the EU,
that's right.
prices went sky high up.
And, of course, the immigration point, Susanna, that you quite rightly raise, isn't, for Italians, isn't just people coming across the Mediterranean, but from Romania, nearly 1 million people have gone to Italy. So from both within the EU, from without the EU, they found EU policy having a very profound effect upon their lives. Susanna, I know Malta is not Italy. What is it, 60 miles away from Sicily? Something like that. The Greeks, when they faced this crisis, gave in. They let the European bureaucrats win. Do you think the Italians will stay firm of resolve and fight back?
I hope so. Because
well, I hope so too.
Where is democracy? Where is the democracy? I mean, you know what? They say that the people that voted for Brexit, we don't know what we were voting for. What I would like a debate about is the people that voted for Remain, do they know what they voted for? Because quite frankly, I don't think so. And,
well, do you know what?
And at the big end, I did not vote out of the EU because I was not knowing what was going to happen.
Well, did Remain voters realise what an authoritarian, anti-democratic system we now have run by the European Commission in Brussels? Susanna, great phone call. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to go to Michael in Derby, another new caller to the show. Good evening, Michael.
Hi, Nigel.
Hi there. So, is the Italian president right to reject a Eurosceptic finance minister?
Well, I just think the right to reject Europe, full stop. Europe's just Germany and France, as far as I'm concerned. It's just the power. It's like nobody else counts. Everybody else is so entwined with them. Thank God we voted out. But having said that, out of what? We're not even out of anything, are we, really? When's it going to happen?
Well, if you listen to the Prime Minister, she keeps trying to opt us back in to whole parts of the European project, to say we're going to stay closely entangled, to take 9 months to trigger Article 50, and now possibly, Michael, for a transition deal to go on until 2023. It's not really...
No transition deal. The date should have come. We voted out. We should have gone out. If they'd gone the other way, obviously, we wouldn't have been very happy about it, but we would have accepted it. They would have gone on with it. But here we are, out, and we're still in, and she's trying to do this transition and this and that and other. I think she's... I don't know who to vote for no more. Theresa seems to be the only person who seems to say we're out of this, we're out of the customs union, we're out of this and that, saying what I want to hear, because that's what we voted for. And then also she do little shady deals with them all, and we're getting to know nothing, like, say, Barney and all them. I've seen you in the European, all that lot. They're just a corrupt lot, like I said, the gangsters.
I've called them gangsters before, and Michael, I should be speaking in a debate here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Don't yet know what I'm going to say. Michael, did you once have trust in Theresa May on Brexit?
Did I want to have trust?
Yes. Did you once have trust in her previously?
Yeah, I did.
You did.
But I've always thought the shade. They're all part of the same people. They're all. I mean, Theresa May's not really in power. She's just a puppet for the people who are pulling the strings and everything. At the end of the day.
Do you know, disenchantment, Michael, is great in this country, and I reckon tonight it's even greater in Italy. Thanks for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show. I'm going to go to Daniel in Fribourg in Switzerland, who's called the show before. Good evening, Daniel.
Hello, good evening. I mean, I would be angry, but I would be angry with the internal Italian system, because I don't understand what's to blame in the EU here, because it would be like blaming the EU for what the House of Lords decided in regards of the repeal bill in the UK. That's something that, that is,
Yeah, I mean, Daniel, what we can say, since the election, European commissioners have been saying again and again and again, you cannot put in place your immigration policy, you cannot put in place your financial policy. So we know that they've been saying that. How much pressure they put on the Italian president is difficult to know. And it does seem, Daniel, a bit unfathomable, doesn't it, that they have a constitution that, I mean, it's rather like the Queen, isn't it, rejecting a government. I mean, that's kind of what's happened here.
Yeah, but it's up to the Italian system to decide. I mean, I'm not an expert on Italian politics, but I know it's been chaotic for decades, even way before that than joining the EU. So I wouldn't blame the EU for this. And then let's be honest. I mean, for Italy, it would be absolutely mental to leave the euro. I mean, there would be an inflation of 30 or 40%.
So
everyone that would lose.
So Daniel, let me ask you: was it a good idea to join the euro for Italy?
Yeah, absolutely.
No, you don't.
For all the southern economies.
Daniel,
Ireland seems to be doing quite well, and the Netherlands, Belgium, and
Ireland has got for being the good boys of Europe, one of the biggest debt ratios of anywhere in the world. And in the case of Italy, look, Italy and Greece joined an economic and monetary union with Germany, Daniel, but with entirely different cultures. And I honestly, I would put this on the line to you. I would say, I think the euro was a disastrous mistake for Italy. I think she'd be a lot better off if she stuck with the lira.
But, well, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, immediately everyone, let's imagine a guy that has been working 30 years of his life and has managed to save a bit of money every month, and now he's got, I don't know, 100,000 euros saved for his retirement. If tomorrow Italy was out of the euro, those 100,000 euros would automatically convert into liras that would equate to 60,000 euros. So he would lose half of his savings.
But Daniel, he'd only lose half his savings overnight if he wanted to buy a house in France or in Germany. If he was spending the money,
or if he wanted to go on holidays, or if he wanted to, I mean, and all the imports that Italy has to.
And what would happen to Italian industry? What would happen to Italian industry?
Well, what will happen? I mean, if Italian industry needs to buy products that are made in Europe, all their costs would go.
Yeah, and so what happens is,
I mean,
so what happens, Daniel, is substitution.
That logic, but
they'd start making their own products again.
Logic. But let's take Venezuela, for instance. If following that logic, Venezuela would be thriving, exporting loads of products and services because their currency is not worth the paper it's printed on. Yet it doesn't work like that, right? Because they're unable to buy anything from abroad.
So Daniel, would you advocate the euro becoming a global currency then?
Well, why not? I mean, it would save a lot of transactions.
Fine, no, Daniel, costs. Thank you. Very good.
Let's go to the calls. Kieran's in Romford. Kieran, you're on the radio. What are you going to say? Good morning.
Morning, Nick. Morning, Jason.
Hello, sir.
Good morning, Kieran.
Morning. As a business owner of a small European express courier company, will the express transport industry survive outside the customs union and single market when we become a third country?
It would be very surprising if it didn't, that there are express deliveries between Switzerland and the European Union, and Switzerland remains a third country. That I think there are a lot of scare stories around how business will operate, but you can get express deliveries from the UK to the United States, that it is perfectly possible to implement and work through customs procedures in a highly efficient and streamlined way. But there will be some changes, because we will not be in the customs union and we will not be in the single market. Response from you, Kieran?
Right. If I can give you some hands-on experience of where I've been, I've been to every border and country in Europe. I've done a job to Switzerland before. I've exported £100,000 worth of exhibition equipment for a medical company from Cambridge. I got sent down what was called a Route 1 at Customs House in Dover. I was there for 7 hours. I then got to the Swiss border. I was there for 5 hours, and I missed the first day of the exhibition. They had to pay a 20% down payment on their temporary imports for their machines that they wanted to exhibit. They missed the first day. It cost them about £10,000, and they were deeply, deeply unhappy. This is not a frictionless border. The Swiss border is not frictionless. You have to stop. You have to go out of your van or your vehicle in your truck. You have to go up four flights of stairs to find your customs agent. You have to get your T1 or T2 forms processed, or your carnet, depending on what you're doing. Then you have to get them stamped by the French, the Swiss, then you can come in. The same applies to Customs House in Dover. There's no infrastructure there. There's no parking. At the moment, you can go there at the right time. You might be in and out in 30, 40 minutes. But when everybody has to clear their customs papers, it will be an absolute nightmare. I just want to know how you can respond to that.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, it's a question of having the right infrastructure in place and the systems that deal with this. That if you look at the imports and exports via Southampton to the rest of the world, these are hugely efficient and streamlined because that's what they're focused on. But the issue with Dover is it's not primarily focused on non-EU movements at the moment. Once we're outside the EU, Dover will have to become a streamlined port. Otherwise, they'll find that they lose business to other ports.
Won't we suffer the problems we haven't that gentleman suffered in Switzerland? Why would... But Switzerland have been at it for years, and they clearly haven't done very well with it. This is what I take from what Kieran's telling us.
Kieran is telling us about an incident where he had a particularly difficult time getting through Switzerland. I appreciate that. I wasn't trying to minimise it. But the Swiss-EU border is most of the time a very efficient border with very limited delays, as is the Norway-Sweden border. Norway being...
The border is much smaller than the UK border. You can go via Gothenburg into Norway and clear customs there at a physical hard border checkpoint. You go from Hirtshals to Larvik and clear at the port in Larvik. It's tiny.
There are checks indeed between Norway and Sweden because Norway is in the single market but not in the customs union. But the border is an efficient border that you can have, and there are many efficient borders globally, and that is what we should be trying to do. That's what government policy is, to have as seamless as possible. But there will be some changes, of course.
I'll let you make your final point, Kieran, because there are. So this will be your final observation, but make a final point to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Kieran?
There's not one single white paper that the government has yet produced on road transport apart from permits for trailers, including caravans and private trailers over 750 kilos. Everybody would be affected. Driving licences would be affected. And they're also saying, according to the European Union white paper, it says you'll need a transport manager that must be a resident in an EU country and you must have a premises. This is going to put small to medium-sized businesses out of business overnight. We won't be able to compete, and all you're going to have is the large companies running it. I'll tell you something. One last thing from me. I transport exhibitions. I transport car parts for the just-in-time production line. I transport AOG airport on ground parts. I do band work for concerts. They cannot go by truck. They must go by van. They rely on the smooth and frictionless transport over borders from Dover to Calais, where you do not stop to clear customs. There's nowhere to stop, and it'd be an absolute disaster when it does.
All right, I have to finish there. Final rejoinder from you.
There will be a white paper. There is a bill on transport going through the House of Commons at the moment, and the issue with driving licence is one at the forefront of the Department of Transport's mind already, and they have a solution in sight. So I think the fears are being overstated.
Kieran, do stay in touch. Thank you. Please understand, you have had a long crack of the whip. We move on. Mike in Wimbledon, you're up next. Mike, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Yes.
Good morning.
So my question is, if it became clear to Mr. Rees-Mogg that Brexit would do damage to this country economically in the short term and long term, and in terms of our influence and power in the world around us, short term and long term, and the public as a whole are clearly losing their appetite for this project, would he respect any change of heart on the part of the British public, or would he push ahead with his own preferred vision?
Well, Mike, thank you for the question, which slightly loaded question, which I think gives your view of the issue. The British people voted to leave, well aware of the scare stories, the Project Fear, the plague of frogs that we were going to get, none of which has happened. So the evidence so far is that this is false, that the economy is surviving, is doing well, and that the economy will continue to thrive.
Not as well as other zones, other countries in the Eurozone.
Having done much better than them for the previous few years. There are cycles within economies, and that shouldn't be any surprise. That's just the normal course of events, but we seem to be picking up again now. And the Eurozone has a few problems. I don't know if we're going to discuss Italy at any point, but there are one or two issues in Europe. And the British people voted, and it comes down to, do you respect democracy? And we see in Italy, it's absolutely fascinating that they don't respect democracy in the end, that the majority went for the five-star movement and for the League, and then the president vetoes one of their appointments and appoints somebody from the IMF, a former economist at the IMF, to become prime minister. And this is just the European establishment insisting that they know best, when the EU's economic performance is disastrous. Look at the levels of youth unemployment across the EU. We've done so much better because we've been out of the euro. We will do better still once we're outside the European Union altogether.
What's the future for Italy, Jacob Rees-Mogg, in the next coming months?
It's very interesting. I wouldn't hold myself up as an expert on Italian politics, but if what one reads in the paper is true, and there's a new election in September, and it's fought on a democracy basis, I would have thought there's a high chance that the five-star movement and the League do better next time than they did this time, and that faces the European Union with a greater challenge than Brexit.
And coming back to Mike's point, which is possibly he is rather betraying which way he stands, but if it is seen that Brexit would be detrimental to the country, would you ever see changing your stance?
Well, I disagree with Mike's premise, that I think it's enormously economically positive.
Let's bring him back in, Mike.
Yes, quite. I asked a concrete question, and Mr. Rees-Mogg happily drifted off into the fog.
Well, I took him to Italy, in fairness, so come back to your question.
Himself respects democracy and the will of the people, in that should the will of the people change when they have clearly put a deal before them, would he respect that will of the people, or is this an option that he is locking off because, like elites himself, he prefers to guide the country down his own preferred route?
Well, I don't know if it's his own preferred route. I remind you of the way the vote went, but Jacob Rees-Mogg...
That's the point, Mike. There was a vote. And to say, well, why don't we change our mind before the vote that we had in 2016 has actually been implemented, to say that you think that a few people might have changed their mind, a few mates in the pub. We had the biggest democratic exercise in our nation's history. 17.4 million people voted to leave. And of course that should be implemented. If in 30 years' time the UK wants to rejoin, that would be a matter for the electorate then. But this result must be respected and it must be implemented. Otherwise, we would find our democracy held in as much contempt as that in Greece and Italy by the European Union.
Mike, thank you.
John from Lincolnshire, I think you're going to get the women calling with your views. Go for it, John.
Very, very likely. Well, for a start, Maajid, good morning to you.
Morning.
I think you've got a couple of misconceptions, if you'll pardon the pun.
All right.
Life has to start at conception. I mean, before conception, there isn't any life. There is just the potential for the life. So that's got to be a scientific fact. Now,
sorry, explain that to me. I don't understand, but I do want to. So please explain what you mean. Well, that's what you've just done. Is you've said that because life doesn't exist before conception, it must exist at conception.
Yes, I mean, something happens at conception that isn't there before conception. The sperm and the egg are two separate entities. At conception, that you get the fusion of the sperm and the egg.
Yep.
Starts the new life.
You sound like a Greek philosopher, John. John, just because life doesn't exist before conception, which I clearly agree, it doesn't mean it happens at conception. It could happen sometime after conception.
Well, I mean, there's a fundamental difference at conception, because until you get conception, nothing happens.
Are you not seeing that? Are you not? How do you know that life doesn't begin at some stage after conception, and conception is merely and the cells are now, they're now growing, but not every growth is a life. I could have a growth on my arm. It doesn't mean it's alive if I chop it off. I mean, so not every growth of cells are life. Clearly we're talking of life here in the sense of consciousness, not life in the sense of the fact they're growing.
Well, I mean, consciousness is a different argument to life, because when does consciousness occur? Now there are plenty of people that have provided evidence that the baby is conscious of certain things very early in the pregnancy, sort of 8 weeks or so, and thereafter. So I don't think you can take consciousness as the point at where life begins.
I'm not taking anything. That's my point, John. I think you're missing my point. I'm saying nobody knows when life begins in the womb. Nobody knows when consciousness begins. We don't even know what consciousness is. And therefore, because it's all a guess, and in your case, probably faith, if not faith, forgive me, a guess still, then at the end of the day, we can't impose our views on other people because they are not definitive.
Well, what we do know is that if the baby is left to develop, that at the time of birth, it is born. Now, you can have
John, can we quote that from you? John from Lincolnshire said, at the time of birth, the baby is born.
Yeah, quite. And it is a
that really helps us, doesn't it?
How conscious is it at that point?
Well, at the time of birth, it's born.
Yeah, but is it conscious?
I'm just repeating truisms back to you. Yeah, by the way, when a baby is born, it's a baby.
So if
it doesn't help us, John.
What happens if you get two babies that are at 23 weeks, i.e., a week below the legal limit for abortion in the UK? Now, one is delivered by emergency caesarean or something like that. It's having all of the might of the NHS thrown at it to preserve its life. The other baby is aborted. What is the objective difference between those two
John,
babies?
you know what? I'm fully ready to concede that the limits themselves may well be arbitrary and they need to be under constant review. I don't think that, with the disparity in various states in the US and then across the world, that they've all got it right. Of course, late-term abortions are incredibly concerning, but what I do know is that because there's so much ambiguity in this issue, because nobody knows when life begins and nobody knows when consciousness begins, what we can't do is take definitive positions and either ban all abortions or allow all abortions into their third trimester. All of us, I think, need to understand that nobody knows what we're talking about. And as a result, we can't impose our ignorance on other women by telling them what to do. And that's the only reasonable position I see we can take. But John, thank you very much for calling in from Lincolnshire and telling us that when a baby is born, it is born. That is really something I didn't know. Now, we're going to Chris on the line from Retford. Tell us what you think, Chris.
Well, I've been listening this morning, and I listen with interest about the continuing debate about immigration, and I find it odd that actually people always seem to focus on the short-term objectives. Now, I was thinking, about your comment about the General Medical Council's report. And the problem with that report is that it's very short-term thinking, and they're thinking that they need to address the problems that we've got now. And that's always been the problem, I guess, and certainly as the years go by and we become more entrenched in global politics, people always think very short-term and they have no long-term objectives. And one of the things I was thinking is that the General Medical Council have absolutely no contingency plan when it comes to our own young people. Yes, of course, we need people, we need nurses, and we need specialists, and we need people like radiologists, for instance, are in great demand. And we are taking a very short-term view when we reach out to other nations, and I would suggest that maybe the government is doing it on the cheap, because in 2017 they removed the nursing bursaries. Now that nursing bursary wasn't just for nurses, which we think of, but it's actually bursaries that are for specialist training. And
so Chris, hold on. Are you suggesting that we have enough labour supply to fill the increasing demand within our NHS for nursing staff to care for the elderly, because we're all living longer? Are you seriously suggesting that there isn't a disparity between people who are living longer and our birth rate in this country?
I'm absolutely saying that. I'm saying that actually when you consider that 16 to 21-year-olds in the UK are largely directionless and unemployed.
Well, hold on. What are the proportions between, because whether they're if they are unemployed and directionless, then they're going to be for any profession, and therefore if they all suddenly chose to join the NHS, then other professions would have a gap. So that doesn't really help us solve the problem. What helps us understand the situation is what the proportions are between young and old in this country. Are you suggesting, and if you are, I'd like you to prove it and back it up with data, that we don't have an issue with population replacement generally across Europe, that we're giving birth as much as we used to, that we're replacing our population and above?
Well, just listening to what your previous callers have been saying, the problem is we're not dealing with the question isn't dealing with the broad economics. It's dealing, or even global economics. It's dealing with the NHS, which is basically the question. And largely,
my question was: are our population rates at replacement rate or above? That was my question. Because if they're not, then you can understand why there's a labour shortage for things like the NHS, because more of us are, as we're growing older, are living longer, and the NHS therefore has an incredible strain and requires care staff, and simply we have a shortage.
It does in the short term, and obviously immigration needs to be considered for short term requirements. Yeah. The problem remains is when you look at the NHS in a long-term perspective. And actually, they've had this problem for, well, I don't know. I'm 54 years old. Now, I've heard this argument for as long as I've been alive. Now, that's given...
That's because our rates of procreation have been dropping consistently over the period you've been alive. And so every short-term solution requires another short-term solution, unless you're going to, of course, ban contraception in this country and tell everybody to have children.
Yeah. But that's the issue, isn't it? The issue. I don't want to be drawn into a non-intelligent argument over this. But the point you've just basically sort of illustrated the fact that it's procreation, and actually the procreation argument isn't valid, because while it may be that while you've got sort of like indigenous white ethnics have a drop in procreation, actually that has been counterbalanced by the fact that you've got different cultures have increased in procreation. So this isn't a white issue. This isn't a British issue. But
Chris, that's people that have migrated to this country having lots of children, right? So it comes back to the point: you need migration to sustain population rates.
Well, actually, you would say that, but my argument is not necessarily that. My argument is that if you
I really am not understanding your argument, Chris. I really don't get the point you're making.
Let me just simplify it for you. Then.
Please do. I'm a very simple man.
One of the biggest increases we see is youth culture being at a lost end. Now, I have a business in Dinnington, which is in Sheffield.
Yeah.
And I would say this without a doubt, the amount of youth unemployed between 16 and 21 that are walking the streets in a small mining community is disproportionate. And I would suggest that actually what we have in the country, the government has always been the biggest employer in any country, and that's unarguable. You cannot dismiss that fact. Now, the NHS is part of that plan, and what I would say is...
you didn't simplify anything there. You've gone back to the same point. You've used an anecdotal example of youth walking around the street to say they could potentially fill the shortage of staff in the NHS, avoiding completely, entirely ignoring, Chris, the data which indicates our population levels are not even at replacement level. So whether anecdotally you see a bunch of kids walking down the road or not, statistically that's not borne out. We are not reproducing at population replacement levels in this country.
Well, I've got to disagree with you. I actually think if you've got a typical town where you have lots of unemployed youth, and I'm pretty sure the listeners would be inclined to agree with me than yourself. But if you've got a lot of young...
It's not about agreeing, Chris. It's just that... No, Chris, no, sorry. It's just a fact. Hold on, Chris, hold on. You're not addressing it. It's a fact. I'm telling you, the data indicates that we're not having as many children as we used to. That's a fact that you're keen to ignore by giving me anecdotal examples of youth walking on the street. Unless you can tell me that the average birth rate per family in this country is 3... which it's not at the moment. It's something like 1 point something, right? We're not replacing our population. Now, I don't know where you're getting the idea from that your anecdotes overrule the fact in this country, and that's what I'm asking you to focus on.
Okay, well, let me just focus on the original argument. The original argument is, does the NHS have a desperate need to employ immigrant labour in its...
No, Chris, you're avoiding my point again, Chris. The UK birth rate hits a 10-year low, right? Now, I'm asking you to focus on that, and you're constantly ignoring it with anecdotes. I'm giving you evidence. No, Chris, it's not about your feelings here, Chris. I know it might hurt your feelings. I'm throwing evidence at you. I'm asking you to respond with evidence.
I'm being very, very focused.
No, you're not.
Of the long-term objective. I'm saying, look, we do have a problem. You're ignoring the fact that we have a disproportionate number of unemployed 16 to 21-year-olds in the UK.
Chris, may I repeat that I'm not ignoring that. I'm saying that whichever job they went into wouldn't solve the problem if we're not reproducing at population replacement levels. And that's just the data, Chris, which you're ignoring.
I don't think it's disproportionate. I don't. I think actually, I think that we have enough young people to go.
Where are you plucking that from? Your brain, just because you want it to be true?
No. 3%.
Chris, our birth rates are at an all-time low. We've hit a 10-year low of birth rates, and you're just deciding, because you don't like that, you're going to make something up and say there's enough youth walking around in your local town that you could get a job for. The truth is that data is telling us that we're not having enough babies in this country. Those who become wealthy, it's a pattern across the Western world, don't reproduce at population replacement levels. Now, you don't like that, so you think the solution is to find a bunch of unemployed youth and send them to work in the NHS. There's not enough of us going around. The maths don't add up. Now, I agree with you, those young people should be in work, and we should do everything possible to get them in work. But the maths tell us that even if they were to be put to work in the NHS, there would be a shortage in another industry, maybe the construction industry. The point is, because we're not having enough children, we need migration to keep our population rates at a sustainable level, because there are more old people in this country, because we're living longer than there are young people. Now, unless you've got evidence to back up your imagination, Chris, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to accept that.
Well, I'm pretty sure that that your figures aren't. What you're doing is you're taking one part of the British demographic and you're making it one size fits all.
No, Chris. Okay, I've just said something. Chris, our birth rates are at an all-time historic low right now. Do you have any evidence to the contrary of that?
I have the evidence from basically what I see, and if you go to the .gov website, you can actually see two things are very pertinent.
Yep.
One is that our birth rate may be shrinking, but our population is massively increasing.
That's because Chris, hold on. No, we're talking about birth rates at the moment.
2 million more homes. Now, if the birth rate that you're talking about is making such a huge difference to the UK's economy, and to the infrastructure in which we've become used to, then how is it that the government is desperate to build 2 million more homes? And apart from that, actually, your figures it doesn't bear.
It's not my figures, Chris. These are not my Chris. These are not my figures. This is from the Office for National Statistics, telling us that the population our birth rate is at an all-time low. Right? So at the end of the day, migration has come in to fill that gap, and that's why you're saying that we need to build more houses, because we've had more people coming in, because we're not giving birth to more people, right? That's not that part of it isn't up for debate. The rest of it is up for debate. Whether the solution to a lower birth rate is migration, I'm more than happy to have that conversation with you, but you can't just make up facts as you go along. The anecdotes you're bringing me, that there are unemployed youth in our towns and cities and they could be put to work, yet they should be put to work. What they're not going to do is solve the problem of low birth rates, which is what people that are pro-migration are trying to solve, so that we can keep our economy strong. That's precisely what Angela Merkel was trying to solve in Germany. Now, I disagree with an open door policy, by the way, but what you can't dispute is that Germany has a serious population birth rate problem. I don't think open door is the way forward for that, but at the end of the day, a controlled migration flow has to be part of the solution for that, Chris. But thank you anyway for calling in. Denise has been waiting patiently from Chelmsford. Go for it, Denise.
I just wanted to say that I really agree with Chris that was on the line to you previously, and that you was quite rude to him. What he stated is how a lot of people feel. What the data is the data which you have in front of you. But if you're saying the increase of having children is down far less, why is it, even in our country, out in the countryside, we cannot get on the road? Why is it wherever we are today? I'm not talking about London in the cities. I'm talking about in the country.
Denise,
we are absolutely overcrowded in this country. And I think most
your feelings, Denise,
believe that.
Denise, your feelings are irrelevant when it comes to the facts. Now, our cities are crowded. Hold on, let me just explain to you something. Denise, your feelings are irrelevant. The facts are we're not having as many babies. That's just a fact.
Well, that's fine. But if that's what the data states, then that's fine. But what he was trying to say to you is, what is going on in this country today, the population, whether it being babies born into this country or whether it's being babies brought into this country, is what's happening. Because in the years I am now, in my 60s, to even 10 years ago, we cannot even get on the road.
Denise, the population is rising because of... Denise, what's happening? Let me explain something. Let me explain. This is precisely...
Because of immigration.
Yes.
They're illegal.
It is. Of course it is.
Illegals in this country
Denise.
as well. And, you know, I'm sick and tired
I can see that.
racist rubbish.
Yeah.
Because nobody is there. I'm not racist, and a lot of other people aren't. But we're sick and tired of hearing it when us as British people, if we stand up and say one
You're
thing,
angry.
we're racist.
What?
What about what they say to us?
What do they say to you? Tell us.
We can't say... You know, I had someone text something the other day about white skins. Is that racist? Of course it's bloody racist. But do we say anything? No, we don't.
Yeah, you're furious, clearly.
I think everybody is sick of it now.
Yeah.
The way our country's... I go up the town...
Denise, do you want to calm down a bit? Denise, you're on national radio. Do you want to... Denise, listen, you're on national radio, you're swearing and you're shouting, and you're not letting me even get a word in edgeways. You want to relax?
Sitting in a city... begging.
You're not doing yourself any favours here, Denise. Everyone listening is thinking this woman is angry.
You're trying to... It just infuriates a lot of people. It's
I
not
can see
just
that.
me.
You really are. Yeah.
Just now was correct on what he was saying.
You're infuriated.
I don't care what your data is. That's what he was saying.
I don't care what your data is should become a slogan on a T-shirt. Why don't you put it on your T-shirt, Denise? I don't care about your facts. My feelings are more important. Now, Denise, first of all, I apologise to people for the language that Denise used there. Denise, I'm happy to have you respond to what I'm about to say, but please allow me to get a word in edgeways. Now, the truth is, whether you care or not, the data indicates that we are at an all-time low in terms of birth rates. So yes, if you're sensing that our population is rising, of course it's because migration is filling that gap. Now, that's what I was trying to say. The reason migration is filling the gap is we still need a young workforce to care for the elderly workforce. You've got one of two alternatives. Either the fact that because we're living longer, the elderly workforce don't have anyone young who are able to then work and pay tax to look after them in the NHS and the care system, which means that they are then neglected, or we allow for migration. There is no other way around this. So you can't really have your cake and eat it too. Now, at the same time, you're going to require at some stage in your life care as well. It's the same problem across Western Europe. It's the problem that Angela Merkel tried to solve, and I think solved it in a wrong way, because I don't agree with open door policies. I agree in a controlled migration flow that is measured and paced and allows for our infrastructure to keep up with it, and allows for integration and cultural assimilation to keep up with it. All of that, I think, is necessary. Otherwise, you end up with a backlash in the form of the far right, as Germany is now currently witnessing. The far right neo-Nazi party, the AfD in Germany, is the third largest bloc in parliament. That's a backlash because Merkel didn't control the migration flows. So yes, it's important to control flows, but ultimately immigration is needed to create a taxpayer base that will pay for the elderly population who are living longer. So yes, population overall is increasing, but the young population aren't increasing because we're not having enough children, and that's what immigration is there to solve. Now, Denise, I'm going to have you respond to that, but you've only got about 10 seconds, and please keep it calm.
I did a statement to you before about the young people in his town. That's what he was trying to say to you, but you wouldn't even listen to him. That's
anecdotal. It doesn't address the statistics.
It's not about the statistics.
No, I can see that. For you, it's not.
This country has happened. Yeah. You know, it's about this country, Great Britain, and it's not anymore. It's not.
Okay.
And many people in this country realise that.
All right.
And, you know, you can't move now. What's it going to be like in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years' time?
The traffic is caused by immigration for you, yeah?
Well, obviously, if it's not breeding babies, it must be. You've just proved that yourself.
All right, Denise, thank you very much for calling in and allowing us to bask in your great wisdom there, and the fact that you're not really concerned with the facts. Nevertheless, Denise from Chelmsford, you've had your say. Thank you. David wants to disagree from Leighton. Go for it, David.
Yeah, as I said to your researcher, I think you're using the apples and oranges wrong comparison here.
Yeah, all right.
I can't seem to remember Johnny Rock or Mick Jagger threatening members of, say, the Clash or the Who with stabbing them.
David, I'm sure, right now, I'm sure we can pull up some troublesome lyrics from the old rock and punk days. I'm sure we can. And actually, I can tell you right now, David, what about this? What about this? We don't need no education, right? What about that? Teacher, leave those kids alone. Is that a call for anarchy and a mass walkout of students from class?
No, it was quite prescient. I didn't like the song at the time.
Well, that's irrelevant. Do you think it should have been banned?
No, of course not. But perhaps if it was brought out today, there might be some. I think it may be quite prescient there in 1979, as I remember it was, because it certainly got some kind of a justification now with the way we hear kids being, let's say, Marxist theology being pumped at them left, right and centre.
Yeah, but David, you see the point you're making. Actually, that lot who were singing it back then, Pink Floyd, were making the opposite point to the point you're making, because they were living in a conservative culture, and they were saying, stop pushing your conservative values down our throats. We don't need no education. And as evidenced, by the way, by their second line, or another brick in the wall. Stop trying to make us clones of yourselves. They were rebelling against the culture of their day. Now, because may I suggest, David, you're slightly older than the people that are involved in drill music, you're perfectly willing and happy to concede an interpretation of the lyrics from the songs you grew up in, but not concede that these young lads who are making this music, they also have an interpretation.
You see, this young lads thing gets me again. They're not specifically all young lads. When they're sitting in them cars, be a certain age to drive. All right, they're youngish.
Well, how old are you, David?
I'm a lot older than you.
There we are, and I'm old compared to them. So they are young compared to both of us.
Young at heart.
Yeah.
Young at
What was that song by Rolling Stones, Street Fighter?
Street Fighting Man.
Yeah. What's that about?
It was about the '68 Paris uprising and...
Street Fighting Man, it's called, yeah?
I declare to take arms, if you will.
And should it have been banned?
No, but it wasn't against individuals. They're naming individuals in these drill songs.
So half of the videos, David, have been taken down by YouTube, and therefore, if it is because what YouTube and Twitter and other social media companies do prohibit is targeted harassment. So I imagine where those half that have been taken down, they were found guilty of targeted harassment by naming individuals to target, then fair enough. But the police, 50% of the other requests have been refused. And so, I think the police need to understand the difference between targeted harassment and lyrics they just don't like.
Or don't understand, because we're being, and I hate to say the word, invaded by a cross-cultural, as you said, Chicago. My main objection is that the kids today, predominantly from the Afro-Caribbean community, seem so lacking in imagination for anything homegrown. They have to follow the American example.
Hold on a minute. Where did rock come from?
Yeah, but that was slightly diversified in an English. With the Stones brought the blues.
What do you think grime is? Is that not a diversified version of hip hop?
Yeah, but where was that based? Off the Roman road, I understand that its genuine roots are, but.
Well, David, I'm sorry. I think what you're doing is making every excuse for the music of your generation and not being willing to extend the same interpretative benefits of doubt to music that isn't of your generation, that perhaps you don't understand. But thank you for calling in. It's David there from Leighton. Again, Carl wants to speak to us from Ipswich. Morning, Carl.
Hello there.
Tell us what you think.
Completely the opposite to the previous caller.
All right. Yep. Well, it's good we have you on there. Explain your view.
Well, I'm so gutted that we're even talking about this. In my mind, 100%, everyone knew what they were voting for. So it's either leave and you leave everything, or we stayed in. And so the vote was to leave. So that's it. We leave. And if the deal is they want to do a second referendum or whatever you want to call it, it should be on, do we accept the deal that we're offered, or we leave with no deal, and that's it, 100%.
So you do agree with the second vote, but you just think the terms of the second vote should be accept the deal Theresa May brings back to us, or we leave with no deal whatsoever?
That would be the only way I could see, because...
Yeah, but Carl, the thing is leaving... you cannot actually... Hold on, Carl. You cannot... I think, in my view, the problem is that to say leave with no deal... I don't see how that makes sense. It's because you cannot just walk away from something that you have legal commitments to. It causes a bit of a difficult situation legally.
Well, then surely it's in the European Union's interest to come up with a decent deal, because there's commitments that they want us to carry on paying for whatever reasons or however long they've got to be paid for.
All right, so let me give you an example, Carl. Let me give a practical example. All right, so we reject the deal that Theresa May brings back, and we leave with no deal. What do we do with the border in Northern Ireland? What does a no-deal scenario become? How does that look like when it comes to the Northern Ireland border with the Republic of Ireland?
I don't know, because I'm not an expert in all those fields. Yep. I know if you ask everyone who voted to leave the European Union, they will feel as passionate about they wanted to leave, and the deal that seems to be coming out, I emphasise seems to be, is not really what we expected.
Yeah, I understand that, Carl, but I'm saying that to say that because I'm saying we should have a vote over the terms of the deal as to whether we accept it or reject it. You're saying we should have a vote over the terms of the deal as to whether we accept it or walk away with no deal whatsoever and still leave. But I'm saying that second option, practically, what does that look like in your mind? If you cannot conjure up what it looks like, then please accept my suggestion that it's an entirely impractical possibility. It's just simply not. It's unworkable to say I'm going to walk away with no deal and not solve the question about the border in Northern Ireland, for example.
Right, okay. I don't know the ins and outs of any type of technology or whatever it is possible to do at the moment.
Yeah, but you're advocating something. You should be able to stand it up.
Well, I can only stand it up as for my personal, as in my business, my environment where I live in now.
Yeah.
That's why I voted to leave the European Union.
Yeah. So, where is your environment? Are you talking about Ipswich?
I live in Ipswich, Suffolk, but I do business all over the country with my company.
What is your business?
It's in the construction industry.
All right, okay.
Construction industry.
So you're involved in construction. If you wanted to import parts from continental Europe and we walked away with no deal, what would be the customs terms upon which you would import and export those parts?
That doesn't affect me at the moment. So I'm not.
You don't import any parts for construction?
I do groundworks in the ground, drainage, curb laying.
Do you have any EU citizens that work for you?
The influx of cheap labour has affected wages in my environment.
No, but do you have any EU citizens that work in your company?
No, not at the moment.
You have no EU citizens working in construction?
No citizens from, shall we say, Europe. Everyone is a UK national, we'll say, yeah.
When you say "we'll say," I'm sorry, forgive me, Carl, but that doesn't sound quite right. We'll say they're all UK nationals. Is that for the sake of convenience now, is it?
No, not at all. No, you see, no. Everyone I know, everyone who works in my company.
All right, okay. Let's take a general view of construction. There are, as we know, lots of EU migrants that work in the construction industry, and the reason I'm asking that question is: if we walk away with no deal, under what terms do we continue our relationship with them working in the construction industry?
In a point that they settle in this country and stay in this country. That would be okay with me.
No, but walking away with no deal, what does that mean? Do we deport them? Do we give them citizenship? What do we do? Because when you say no deal, it means that we don't answer any of those questions.
Well, I'm happy with the outcome that there was. One of the first agreements was that EU citizens who are currently living and working in this country will have full rights that were agreed.
Oh, okay, that's part. So if you said full rights, so what happens to Brits living in Spain and France?
Well, that should be replicated, shouldn't it?
Oh, well, there's a deal then, isn't it, Carl? That's a deal. That's not a no deal. The minute you say that our citizens have that their rights should be replicated in the EU to the rights we're giving EU citizens here, which, by the way, hasn't happened yet, but the minute you say that, you're getting into deal territory. But you've just advocated for no deal.
There you go. I've been a great political diplomat now. I've just said, look, there's the deal so far. That's one of them. We can tick that box. That's fine.
No, but you're going to have to get the EU people to agree with that too. which means a deal. And then that comes back to the question that if then you put the deal that you, Carl from Ipswich, have negotiated on our behalf with the EU, why should Carl from Ipswich get his way? The rest of the nation needs to have their say on Carl from Ipswich's negotiation. But either way, Carl, I think you and I have both agreed now through talking, which is a great thing, by the way, that a no-deal scenario is entirely impossible, because to practically continue living life, we have to answer these sorts of questions.
I understand where you're coming from, but again, the deal that's the rest of the deal, or we'll call it the news that we hear over the negotiation period that's been going on. There's a lot of things that just are not what we envisaged. And
that may well be the case. That's a bit like my teenage son saying, "Dad, you're not the kind of dad I envisaged." I mean, at the end of the day, we've got to deal with life, haven't we, Carl?
Yeah, I understand, yeah.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, no deal, do you now agree with me, is not a practical suggestion?
I don't think the question that you're asking, as in, if it's not a practical suggestion, but to put a second referendum or a second vote to accept the deal or stay in, we know what the outcome will be.
What if, Carl, you voted Brexit? What if Theresa May came back?
Hold on a minute, Maajid.
Yep, go on.
Please.
Yep.
The deal that we will get given is already looking not a great deal, because there's been concessions and it's not ideal.
Yeah. So wouldn't you want to say, what if you don't like the deal?
The EU's interest to not give us a good deal because they know that we won't accept it.
And Carl, you voted Brexit. If Theresa May comes back and says, right, Carl, the deal I'm bringing you for Brexit is continue with free movement, continue with free trade, continue with everything, and I'm calling it Brexit, wouldn't you want to have the right to reject that, Carl?
Oh, yeah.
There we are. So you agree on a second vote?
I agree that we should, but we shouldn't be forced into staying in the EU either.
Well, there we are. That's why it's called a second vote, Carl. It looks like you and I are on the same page now, which is have a second vote over the terms of the deal without forcing anyone, which is what the second vote is about. But thank you very much, Carl, for being a sport and for having that conversation with me. That's what, folks, I hope you were listening, is I hope that's the kind of conversation Remainers and Brexiteers can have, remaining civil, polite to each other, being conceding where we don't have answers, accepting that we don't know everything. Carl, I want to thank you, because that was a very civil conversation, and I think we made some headway. We got somewhere, and I think that you may, for the rest of the day, be thinking and mulling over some of this conversation, and that's what dialogue is about. So that's Carl from Ipswich there being a... There's lots of you responding to that last call that I had with Carl from Ipswich on whether there should be a second vote on the terms of the deal that Theresa May brings back or not. Lots of people happy that it was so civil and that Carl appeared to change his mind, and that's what I'm encouraging all of us, actually, because we've all become quite divided over Brexit, and I'm encouraging all of us to try and have civil conversations around this while not compromising our core positions if we continue to believe them, but of course changing our minds if and when evidence is presented to us. Vicky from Brighton, tell us what you think.
Hello, Maajid. Good morning to you. First time I've phoned you, but I just felt I had to, actually.
Oh, please. Good. Welcome.
Right, okay. Just to say that I was a voluntary campaigner for the Brexit campaign, which I did over 10 weeks, and I talked to, therefore, in that time, hundreds of people from all walks of life.
Yep.
And it's perfectly true that individuals had different reasons for wanting out of the EU. And these stemmed from the numbers. They felt too many people were coming into this country, irrespective of the background or anything. Other people felt that the third world exports were being totally undermined because of the tariffs that the EU put on them. And frankly, that was their only export. Other people felt that the immigration system was completely rigged and totally unfair against maybe a doctor from India or whatever. They were right down the queue.
On the second vote, Vicky.
Yeah, the second vote. I completely disagree with this. I was in business, Maajid, and I had to negotiate over the years many contracts. And if the other side had known that this wasn't the final discussion at all, that I have to go back and then think again and whatever, what kind of deal would I have been offered on those contracts? Awful, pathetic. The EU, and the point is, people talk about, if there's no deal. Well, if there's no deal, we walk away with 40 billion, don't we? Because we don't have to give it to the EU.
Well, this is where I'm stuck, Vicky, because I get your point. I get your point that if you were to tell people that you're negotiating with that the deal they give you, that they offer you, isn't the final status because you have to put it to a vote, then they've got no incentive to give you a good deal because they want, of course, the public to reject the terms that they agree to so that we stay in the EU. I take that point. However, it's a catch-22, is it not? Because at the same time, if Brexiteers and, let's forget Remainers for a moment, because Remainers, like me, are already unhappy with any deal because we don't want to leave the EU. So it's about Brexiteers here, Vicky. If Brexiteers don't like the deal Theresa May brings back, don't they have a right to reject it?
Well, what price democracy? It's like
Sorry, say again? I didn't catch that.
Well, what price democracy? It's like having an election, and the government that's elected, obviously, a percentage of the population don't like them.
Yeah, that happens all the time, Vicky.
To have a second election.
No, that happens all the time, though, Vicky.
The things they're going to do.
But Vicky, that happens all the time because whether in a parliamentary democracy like ours or in coalition governments across Europe, when there's a motion of no confidence in a parliamentary democracy, first past the post system like ours, what it requires is for the party that has the majority in Parliament to lose a vote in a motion of no confidence. In a coalition government like in continental Europe, what it requires is for one of the coalition partners to pull out, and that automatically triggers another election. That happens all the time.
We are not continental Europe.
No, but I'm saying... No, I gave both examples, Vicky. I said even here it happens.
5 years. We have a set term of 5 years.
Yeah, but Vicky, it can happen between that time, can't it?
Well, it could do, but what does that say for Great Britain Limited? Are people so absolutely terrified that we're not a country that can stand on our own 2 feet? Do you know the most interesting...
No, but Vicky, let's please, hold on a second. Let's strip away all of the hyperbole, because I try and do that even for the Remain camp, and let's get to the nitty-gritty. Let's talk about the nitty-gritty, all right? What does it mean to walk away with no deal? What does that mean for the Northern Irish border? What does that mean, for example, for the continuation of export goods and import goods from the EU into Britain in terms of customs? What does a no-deal scenario look like to you?
Well, first of all, as I understand it, with the Irish border situation, there are already situations in place because obviously Southern Ireland has the euro anyway. So that has to be taken into account between...
What has to be taken into account? I don't understand. No deal means we don't take anything into account. No deal means we walk away without resolution.
We don't want... I mean, if you take the case of Detroit and Windsor in Canada, Detroit is in America...
Vicky, I'm sorry. So stop a minute, Vicky. You keep referring to other cases. No deal means we don't refer to other cases. No deal means we say we don't care... Hold on, Vicky. Let me put the question to you.
Yeah, okay.
No deal means we don't care what else happens anywhere in the world. We're simply not negotiating. We're walking away. So if I say to you what a no-deal scenario looks like, what you cannot do as a logical answer to that question is continue to refer to other deals in other countries, because no deal means we're not having a deal.
No, Maajid, I was answering your question about Northern Ireland. What I was saying was, and giving one example, that between Windsor, Ontario, which is in Canada, and Detroit, which is in America, they have a very slick system which uses technology. You wouldn't think man landed on the moon over 50 years ago.
Did they agree on that technology? Did they mutually agree, Vicky, to use that technology for each other?
Well, I presume they do, because...
But that's a deal then, isn't it, Vicky? But that's a deal. Which is why I stopped you halfway through the answer to that question, because no deal means you walk away without any mutual agreement.
But do you not think the EU are being as difficult as human...
Now you're changing the conversation, Vicky. I'm asking you specifically what a no-deal scenario looks like practically. And I'm asking you how on earth it can practically work, and you give me an example of a deal.
Well, we don't want a hard border, so if the other...
It doesn't matter what we want. If we walk away with no deal, we're not talking to them.
We're £50 billion better off then, aren't we?
Yeah, but then what does it look like practically, Vicky?
Well, practically, I think the EU would then come running because we are their biggest export market, basically, this country.
So it means we still have to have a deal in the end, doesn't it?
Well, yes, but I think you'll find that a lot of German companies...
Was that a yes?
...etc. very...
So hang on, that was a yes, yes? So we do have to have a deal in the end. That's a yes.
Yeah, politicians are very...
Wait, Vicky, no, you're being a politician. Is it a yes? Do we have to have a deal in the end?
I think I've gone back to the point that...
is that a yes, Vicky, or a no?
Deal. Well, no deal is better than a bad deal. So, yes, if we have no deal, we have no deal. But
hang on, Vicky, we're going around in circles here, because you just said they will come running to us if we don't have a deal on the Northern Irish border, which will mean we then end up having to negotiate something because they're worse off, which means a deal.
Which includes the issues of the Northern Ireland border. If we say, right, we'll walk away, the EU...
If we walk away, what does the EU do next? Because somehow we're still going to have a relationship with the Republic of Ireland, aren't we?
That would be very interesting.
Yeah, right. So they're going to come back asking for a deal, yes?
Oh, I think the EU would come running.
Right, absolutely. For a deal. Yes, Vicky?
Absolutely, for a deal.
Right, so we have to have a deal in the end, true or not?
Well, the point is, it's up to the EU, isn't it?
If we have to have a deal in the end, it comes back to the original question, which is, whatever that deal is in the final status, even if it's when the EU come running, right? Even if it's when they come running on your assumption of your scenario, should the British public have a say over that final status deal?
No, we have a government, basically.
Yep.
And I don't believe in a second referendum.
All right, should the Parliament have a say over it?
Well, the point is we're in a parliamentary democracy, and at the end of the day, this has been pushed through with a lot of Soros's money to take it to the High Court and all the fiddling around in the House of Lords and everything, and the undermining, etc. And a lot of money's gone in by big business, basically. The vast majority...
All right, Vicky. All right, you know what, Vicky, we're going to move on because, I'm trying to give you a chance to speak to me. If you're not going to answer my questions in a straight way, should the Parliament have a say over it or not? Is quite a straightforward question, requires a straightforward answer. Here on LBC, leading Britain's conversation, sitting in for James O'Brien all week, on the subject of whether there should be a second vote over the terms of the deal that Theresa May brings back, because George Soros has backed the notion with his money, with his funding. Should Britain have a second EU referendum? I'm asking in a different way. Should the people of Britain have a say over Theresa May's deal that she brings back after negotiations conclude? Mike from Southampton, tell us what you think.
Good morning, Maajid. I promised myself I wasn't going to get involved in this, but when that bloke from Trowbridge called in, I couldn't resist it.
It's like an addiction, isn't it?
First of all,
my name is Mike, and I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah. First of all, he said there's 17.4 million different opinions of leavers. There is not. There was very basic and very, very clear indications of what we were asking for when we left. But nevertheless, if we're going to have another vote like this people's vote that people want to do, why is it such a binary choice that accept the condition or we remain in the European Union? That decision has already been made. Despite what George Soros wants to do with his money, we've already made that decision. Even if it goes to Parliament, because that's the next question you're going to ask me, put it to Parliament, but the choice is accept the deal or go back to the European Union and tell them to start again.
All right, I see. So the second vote, the terms for you... Yeah. So hold on, Mike, let me just clarify your view. The terms for you should be either we accept the deal Theresa May brings back or we go back to renegotiate where we don't like the terms. How long does that continue for, in your view, Mike?
I don't know. We do it once more, and then if after that we say, forget it, European Union, you're obviously not negotiating in good faith, you're all crooks, we're leaving anyway on whatever deal we... But
Mike, that brings me back to my chat with Vicky, which I don't want to repeat again. Please don't make me go around in circles. No matter what scenario you imagine in your mind, walking away on a no-deal basis is never the end result. It's only another tactic to try and arrive at another deal, right? And so ultimately, we still will end up at a deal, and the question still applies. Should Britain have a say over the deal that we end up with?
Well, you can go round and round in circles then, but yes, we should have a say, but the question needs to be phrased in the way that we've already accepted we're leaving. So the answer is, if they still won't accept it on a second...
So we keep going back and forth like that, playing ping-pong. How long does that carry on for?
No, then we go back out on WTO rules and we let the world markets govern what happens.
The WTO rules don't solve our Northern Ireland problem, Mike.
There is no problem in Northern Ireland. You don't have to have a border between Northern Ireland...
Mike,
construct.
Years of terrorism tell us there's a problem in Northern Ireland.
Rubbish.
There was no terrorism.
As a threat. So there's a whole bunch of old has-beens IRA terrorists that are just waiting with their guns to start again. If there's any sort of...
Isn't that a problem?
On a border.
Isn't that a problem?
No, it's not going to happen.
What's not going to happen?
There's not a whole bunch of old IRA terrorists waiting with their guns to start a war again.
No, Mike, I'm saying there's a problem there, though, isn't there? The Stormont Assembly's broken apart, hasn't sat for months, right? And the peace process is contingent. It's contingent on having a situation with a relationship with the European Union. And so at the end of the day, there has to be a negotiated settlement. Whether you like it or not, there is a problem in Northern Ireland, and the WTA rules won't solve it.
There is no problem in Northern Ireland. That's been made up. If you recall,
Mike?
This is a different phone-in.
Mike!
Martin McGuinness, if you recall, he knew he was dying, and he used his death to bring about a constitutional crisis in Northern Ireland.
Mike.
He made it sound like he had to leave. He was leaving anyway.
Okay.
Because that was predetermined.
All right, so according to your solution, we say, all right, we're going back to WTO rules, right? And then somebody from the Republic of Ireland wants to step across into Ulster. What do WTO rules say about that?
Well, they already step across into Ulster.
Right, so we still have freedom of movement between the EU and Britain after we leave?
We have freedom of movement across the British Isles, which includes Southern Ireland. We've had it since 1920 under the...
But Mike, I don't think you're understanding. The Republic of Ireland allows somebody to step from France into its territory, and if that French person then goes from the Republic of Ireland into Ulster, it's then in United Kingdom territory. Should that scenario continue to happen? What do the WTO rules say about that?
The Republic of Ireland is not in Schengen, and therefore anybody coming in from France, Germany, or any of the other Schengen countries can be recorded and will know where they're going.
Well, no, they're stepping into the Republic. The Republic does what it wants. Do we need to know what the Republic's doing?
No, the Republic of Ireland doesn't do what it wants. It's doing what it's told by Michel Barnier and the rest of the crooks.
But that's my point, Mike. Mike, hold on a minute. You're saying we go to WTO rules. What do WTO rules say about the Republic of Ireland remaining a member of the EU and allowing for free movement from the EU into the Republic? If the border remains open with Northern Ireland, that means free movement remains in the United Kingdom as well. What do the WTO rules say about that scenario?
WTO rules say nothing about that. You know very well about that.
Well, then how can we revert to WTO rules without a deal?
We can revert to WTO rules on trade, and if people want to wander across the border, they're not hardly going to come across in the hundreds of thousands, are they?
Well, if that's the Achilles heel, the only place from which you can enter into the United Kingdom via the EU, I suggest to you they will continue entering the UK through the Republic of Ireland.
No, it won't happen. I just don't think it'll happen. It's being raised as a
okay, Mike, you're worried about Polish and Romanian and so on and so forth migration from the EU into Britain, and you want to shut that door, but you're going to leave the door open in Northern Ireland, and you're telling me that the very thing you're worried about won't continue to happen.
Did I tell you I was worried about Romanian and Polish immigrants? I don't think I did.
So you're fine with free movement?
I'm fine with relative free movement as long as...
No, free movement, because the Republic of Ireland will continue to have free movement with the EU.
Because at the moment you have free movement of criminals, of...
Yeah, but Mike, whatever you have at the moment, the Republic will continue to have that scenario. And so if you don't shut the door on Northern Ireland, they will enter Britain through Northern Ireland.
And I still contend they will not come across in their hordes like they are now.
Well, if you've left the door open, why wouldn't they?
Well, because perhaps they'll want to come and want to go and stay in Ireland.
Mike, listen to yourself. Please listen to yourself. You sound like somebody who's saying a robber's going to come through my front door, so I'm going to bolt the front door and leave the back door open, and the robber won't come through. That's the kind of logic you're using, Mike.
Problem. If you're saying that's a problem, let's put a border up between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland.
Which is not what the WTO says. I mean, you can suggest that, but if you suggest that, Mike, then that isn't a no deal. That's us saying, okay, one of the things we're going to do if we don't like the terms of the deal that Theresa May brings back is we're just going to erect a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. If you do that, then what happens to the peace process?
Why is the peace process governed by a no border?
Because that was part of the terms of the deal with the Sinn Féin.
Yeah, and I think you'll find that it also says subject to any future changes. So the future changes happened, that we have elected to leave the European Union. Ireland has elected to stay in the European Union because they had a second referendum because they were told to. And if that means a hard border, then it's their fault, not ours.
And just to hell with the peace process in Northern Ireland, yeah?
No, not to hell with the peace process. Put a border up, and if Sinn Féin decides they yet again want to play silly buggers, then we'll have to go after them.
Go after them. Well, there we have it, folks. That's the solution. Go after people with whom we break the terms of a Good Friday deal with. And if they don't like it, we just go after them. Britain's most senior doctors have warned ministers that they will not be able to bring down waiting lists or treat mental illnesses properly without an annual £7 billion increase to health spending. Do we need to lower our expectations for the NHS? We're going to go straight to the calls. The lines are open, 034560 60973. And Bill wants to speak to us from Exeter. Tell us what you think, Bill.
All right, Maajid. Right, it's really annoyed me. See, now I don't mind paying more to the NHS if I knew that it was going to go to the right places. I mean, at the end of the day, my wife works in hospital, my mother's a nurse, and last night I had to take my grandmother into hospital about 1 o'clock this morning because she's suffering with pneumonia. Okay, and it was an absolute exceptional service from the ambulance right the way through to getting into the A&E. Now, what my problem is when you're spending so much money on procurement, when you're paying £9 for a box of paracetamol, or the hospital is, or £15 for rubber gloves, where they can pay £1.50 and however much paracetamol costs, yeah, something's got to be cut away there. We've got to sort out our procurement. Also, backroom managers. Do we really need backroom managers to sort, if you're running this?
Yeah.
This is where that money's going. And
No, Bill, this is where some waste is happening, but I refuse to believe that you can find £7 billion by efficiencies alone, which is what you're suggesting.
No, you're right. Efficiencies alone isn't going to make it. But also, let's cut back on health tourism. Now, I'm not averse to helping out anyone. I think, yes, we should help them. But when we give someone that help, then you give them a bill, and then they disappear back to their own countries, and then we can't chase them for that money. You're talking millions and millions alone there.
Yeah, well, that's still not £7 billion, Bill. And, of course, that one there, health tourism, raises some practical questions, Bill. What would you do, right? Say you're a doctor, what would you do? Hold on, Bill. Bill, let me ask you a question. What would you do if on the health tourism one, if a woman appears to you and she's clearly heavily pregnant and is in pain and says she needs to see a doctor, and she's not due to give birth, so it's not one of those like she's in 9 months, because that's easy. You can say, all right, well, of course I'm going to deliver the baby, but she's not due to give birth. She's in pain and she's heavily pregnant. Are you going to say, where's your passport?
No, that's not what I'm saying, mate. What I'm saying is, at the end of the day, why can't we be like other countries when it comes to this kind of thing in medical healthcare? Now, I'm not saying, I don't want to be a Philistine about things, but we've got to look at things pragmatically. We've got to look at it in the right way. Now, I'm not saying let's not help anyone. I'm not saying that. I think everyone needs help. We've got to give it to them. But there must be a system to be able to recuperate that fund.
Yep, well, that's true, but until we figure that answer out, I can assure you, Bill, we're not going to raise £7 billion that way.
No, but at the end of the day, what I'm saying here, Maajid, is if the government was seen, and the hospitals and the NHS Trust was seen to be making these efficiency savings, people would be more inclined to agree to want to pay more into it, if that makes sense. So it's a 50-50 thing, isn't it? It works.
Yeah, that makes sense, Bill. That definitely makes sense. You're saying it's not either or. If the NHS could demonstrate they're making savings, people will be more willing to trust it and pay more. However, the NHS may well believe they've already demonstrated that, Bill, because year on year they've had to make efficiencies to a point now where it's been revealed in this sort of latest evidence has been presented by the leaders in the profession that partly why their budget is going up is because they're having to pay for temporary staff because so many staff are leaving because they've had a year-on-year tax, they've had a year-on-year pay cut.
They're cutting it from the wrong place. They're cutting it from the wrong place to keep people. And I don't dare I say this, for someone to actually secure a contract where you're paying extortionate amount of money for goods, yeah, someone's got to be saying, I've seen it in the military, mate. Someone's taking a backhander somewhere. There's a bit of whining and dining going on to secure these contracts.
May well be. But you'd agree with me, Bill, it's not $7 billion worth of whining and dining, so let's continue to try and look for efficiencies, but ultimately we're not going to avoid the question of tax, are we?
No, we're not, but like I said to you, mate, people aren't going to kick off about paying more tax if they see this happening on the other side as well.
All right.
It's a 50-50, let's meet in the middle, and then people won't be bothered about paying more. I wouldn't be bothered about paying more if I saw...
Cheers, Bill.
Efficiency cutbacks.
Yeah, all right, you made your point clearly. That's Bill there from Exeter. And James wants to speak to us from Kingswood. Go for it, James.
Maajid, how are you?
I'm all right. Tell us what you think.
Good. Two things. Number one, there's no question at all, well, in my opinion, that weekend binge drinking with the strain that it puts on the NHS should absolutely be charged. No question about it. And I don't think there's anyone who would disagree with that.
How? How do you charge it?
How do you charge it? Well, the people whoever it is who are taken in, I'm going to presume that probably 9 out of 10, certainly 90% of weekend binge drinkers, even be it teenagers, early 20s, whatever, whoever it might be, will have identification on them, will have a wallet, will have some form of ID at the point of which they are actually physically picked up and put into an ambulance.
You mean, so if they have their stomach pumped, you go into their pockets and you pull out their ID?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow, that raises ethical questions, James.
Does it, really?
Well, because you're not allowed to search anyone. Okay, even the police aren't allowed to search anyone without certain procedures.
Sorry. When you say it raises ethical questions, when that person is picked up off the street and put into an ambulance, if it was, and let's go the whole hog here. If it was a dead body, okay, then whoever the police, the paramedics, well, it would be police, obviously, because they would be called. The body would be searched, would be patted down to see if there was any identification in order to find out who the person.
Yeah, but James, a living person has certain rights, James. You can't draw an analogy between a dead person and a living person. Even there are reasons why the police aren't allowed to search people without proper cause. And so you've got to keep in mind that arbitrarily searching people in the hospitals raises a whole bunch of other ethical questions. There's a reason why Theresa May got rid of stop and search.
Yeah, which was the wrong move, by the way, and I think the whole country agrees with me when I say stop and search. The ethical, ridiculous ethos that brings up that everyone is too scared to talk about the elephant in the room, it was the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, but James, you'd agree that whether you agree or not that stop and search should come back or not, you'd agree her reasons for ending it, there's a legitimate concern about that there, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. Of course there is. And it has to be done, as with everything. There is a line with everything. So it needs to be done in the correct way. But the bottom line is it needs to be done. And so everybody knows that, yes, of course we want it done in the right way. But that said, everyone wants...
Would you want police to be able to search your house without a warrant?
Would I want police to be able to search my house without a warrant? No, I wouldn't.
Right. So if somebody's incapacitated and goes into a hospital, hold on, James. If somebody's incapacitated and goes into a hospital, are we entitled to search their body for possessions without their permission?
I believe we are. Yes.
How? How? How does that make sense? You don't want somebody to search your house without permission.
Well, I'll ask you. I'll answer that if you want me to. How does it make sense? It makes sense because if our public servants, A&E, paramedics, ambulance drivers and/or police are actually having to take time, okay, to pick up an incapacitated person who cannot stand, who cannot speak, who is stumbling around, who is potentially causing harm to others, and we have to have our public servants, okay, who our taxes pay for, have to go there, pick that person up, put them in the ambulance, take them into a hospital, do everything, okay, to get them from the state they're in now when they find them into a recovered state. Then during that process, I believe it is absolutely ethical and absolutely correct and absolutely right for those people, our public servants, who take them from being in an incapacitated state to recovery, to at the very least, be able to see if in one of some of their pockets, in anywhere of the clothes that they have on them, if there's a wallet, so they can find some identification. Absolutely.
All right. I mean, you're going to state absolutely multiple times. That's fair enough. You feel strongly about it. But I'm saying, how much do you think we should charge them?
That's a question for debate. I don't know. I don't know is the answer. But what I do believe is that there should be a charge. There should be, if somebody of their own free mind and will goes out, binge drinks and gets completely out of it on a Friday night in a high street somewhere, and result of that...
What about somebody that takes... hold on, James. What about somebody that takes pills for as an overdose because they're attempting suicide?
Say that again. Somebody who takes pills as an overdose because they're attempting
suicide, and they have their stomach pumped as well.
Yeah, that particular instance, I think that would come into the same category as well. Yeah,
I know you probably would, and that's why I'm asking you how you justify that, because that's clearly a mental health issue, surely.
Yeah, but
that person needs help, not be charged. That person shouldn't. If you charge that person, James, if you charge that person, that is precisely what the NHS was set up to do, to be free at the point of use for people that have health problems. Someone that's trying to kill themselves clearly has a health issue.
When the NHS was set up, Maajid, and listen, you don't need me to tell you this. When the NHS was set up, okay, mental health wasn't even a phrase that was in our daily.
Well, that's irrelevant. It is now, because we recognise mental health to be we now recognise mental health to have parity of esteem, James. So forget when it was set up. Address the issue now in this day and age. Do you take mental health seriously? Quick, we're running out of time.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you very much. That's James there from Kingswood with some interesting suggestions there.
We fell for it. Jazz in Crawley, hello.
Hi, Sheila. Regular contributor to Russian propaganda news.
Okay. And Ukrainian now.
Yeah, and Ukraine also. I was just saying to a researcher, the last time I bought a newspaper was September the 12th, just after the buildings came down, because of the amount of fake news that was at that time surrounding September the 11th. And I don't think it's improved, and I certainly believe that journalism has been compromised by this fake news, because, you know, with the advent of the internet, YouTube and everything else like that, people research a hell of a lot, make their own YouTube videos on these kind of so-called fake news to try and bring out the truth. And we have got to try and bring out the truth no matter what as journalists. It's imperative, you know, and it's imperative also to call out anybody that's doing fake news. You know, I don't know what else to say. It's kind of mind-boggling, because I search the internet 24 hours a day. Well, not 24 hours a day, but as much as I can for real news, for proper news.
And how do you decide what's real and proper?
I guess you've got to go on a gut feeling on it, and not to actually take the whole article as the truth, is to, you know, try and take snippets of it which you kind of believe. I'll give you an example about the skip holes. There wasn't any evidence, any detail, but there was a lot of conjecture about, you know, what had actually gone on.
Well, hang on a sec. Okay, let's dig down. Okay, let me dig down into that statement a little. Just 2 days ago, we had the medical staff at the hospital in Salisbury that treated them talking about the case. Now, unless they are very good actors and actresses and part of a massive MI5 plot to create a fake attempted assassination on the streets of Salisbury, and the same would apply to the witnesses who waded in and helped them and called 999 when they were first found on that bench in a distressed state and a semi-conscious state. Unless all of those people are really good actors, I'm prepared to accept that the medical staff at Salisbury really have been treating people for the condition that they tell me they've been treating those people for. Are you?
Well, perhaps so, but then I would like to ask, why is the medical profession actually putting themselves out to clarify this? Because it doesn't appear that they do it all the time.
But they often do it well. They often do it after big terrorist attacks or shootings. And in America, you see it quite a lot. The medical team that saved people will talk about the injuries and talk about what their team faced. You saw it with the Manchester arena bombing. It's become... I understand your question, but it has become quite usual. And I don't think it's any bad thing, because, you know, we do want information.
But isn't this down to the journalists to give us this kind of thing, not to rely on doctors and nurses who should be treating people, not...
But it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop what journalists also do, does it? It doesn't stop journalists from also speaking and searching and asking questions. It's just a layer of information that we can decide for ourselves whether we believe or not.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we've got to do, is train ourselves to... search the internet to look for real news and to hold journalists accountable for fake news, I believe.
Do you have confidence in... Well, you tell me what you have confidence in, Jez, when you read and watch and listen.
I don't have much confidence in the BBC, say.
Why?
I kind of think that a lot of BBC articles have got an agenda behind it. It's not just, here's the news, this is what it is. It's kind of salacious and sometimes impartial, and it's more about feeling nowadays than fact.
Well, I think that's probably unfair on the BBC. I mean, I worked there for 25 years and I saw excellent journalism and I saw examples of bad journalism, but when it was bad, it was mainly just lazy rather than actively trying to deceive anyone. But I have to tell you, in every newsroom I ever worked in, the word impartiality was said on a daily basis, and there were questions asked, there were conversations about the tone of pieces, making sure that people were properly represented, that things were balanced. And again, it's an imperfect process, but it's a damn sight better than a lot of the stuff you see around the world.
I agree with a part of that, Sheila. Not all of the BBC. Some of the BBC is very good. But a lot of it, well, I'm afraid I can't really go with it. And
what is it about, that's enough of the BBC, what is it about LBC that gives you confidence?
Doesn't give me much confidence because...
well, you called us.
Well, actually, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be coming on to LBC because you do have me on quite regularly on there, and that I'm quite surprised about. But I must say I do.
Why are you surprised about it?
Because sometimes I do ring up and I do scream and shout and you don't let me on. But then when you do let me on, I do make my points and, I'm quite happy about that.
Oh, you shouldn't scream and shout, though.
No, I shouldn't.
That won't help any of us. And we all want to sometimes. We all want to scream and shout. I want to scream and shout quite a lot, but it doesn't help very much. Jazz, thank you very much for your call. Jazz in Crawley in West Sussex.
Tony's in Epsom. Hello, Tony.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. What would you like to say?
I think with this case, this staged murder, I think it's evidence that there is a culture of staging crime to make it look like Russia have carried it out. It proves that. It's evidence of that. We've been talking a lot lately about...
Give me an example.
Sorry?
Give me an example.
Of what?
Well, what you just said.
This case is the example.
Well, we don't know if it is or not, do we? Because the Ukrainian security services say that they have evidence that Russia was about to carry out an assassination, and they've arrested 2 people. Now, I suspect...
And we'll wait and see what comes of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
They've staged the crime. And it's evidence of that. This is the evidence. This is evidence of a staged crime.
Yes, but if you look into the background of why they've done it, now, if they're telling the truth, then Mr. Babchenko clearly thinks that they were telling the truth, otherwise why would he have gone along with it? If they are telling the truth, well, we can all draw our own conclusions from that. But I think staging one thing like this does not mean that everything else is staged, but that's the problem, that people will now think that it is.
It doesn't prove that everything else is staged, but it proves that there is a culture of staging these things.
No, it's not a culture. It's not a culture. It's one incident.
How do we know it's one incident?
Well, because that's the one we know about. I mean, if you say it's a culture, give me evidence of others.
If they've done it, then we know that they do it. So the question is, and I can't give you. I fit boilers every day. I can't provide you with evidence.
But you're saying there's a culture here, and that means that it can't just be a one-off.
Well, it proves that this is the sort of thing they do. They've done it. So now the question is, how many others have they done?
Well, questions I can't answer. Tony, thank you.
We're not supposed to believe everything that we read in the press. Then you've got to start with the premise that it's all fake news. And then you allow us to make up our own opinions.
No, I don't subscribe to that, because I think Well, Andrew, if we're going to have a conversation, you have to let me speak occasionally.
You just said that you had the same premise as my father taught me, which was don't believe
everything you read in the paper. You have a... Oh, for goodness sake, would you like to let me engage in this conversation, or do you just want to have a monologue?
Story.
Oh my goodness!
They don't tell you which is a true story.
Right? Are you going to stop talking?
Yes. No. I'll listen to you.
Good.
I'll listen to you in the afternoon anyway.
Well, I'm very glad. But if a conversation means a dialogue between 2 people, not someone just going on and on and on to exclude the other person from the conversation. Here we go again. Dear, oh dear. Do you know, Andrew, I'm just going to cut you off in a minute because I'm fed up. If we're not going to have a conversation, fine. But I'm perfectly prepared to have a conversation with you if you'll let me.
So am I.
Okay?
Yep.
I don't hide where my political views come from. The whole premise of this radio station is that the presenters are allowed to offer their opinions. And we then rely on you, the listener, to make up your own mind on what we're saying, whether you agree with us or whether you don't agree with us. And I always say I much prefer having callers who disagree with me, because that actually makes for a much better conversation. I think people learn more from it. And I learn from it as well. Sometimes I'll start off with a view on a subject at the beginning of the hour, and then at the end of the hour, I might have a very different view. And that has happened on probably more occasions than I would like to admit. I don't have a right-wing agenda to push, but I have my beliefs which I will lay out for people to agree or disagree with. What's wrong with that?
Oh, no, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but what I'm saying is your argument is that one of the things that you said was that you worked on the same premise as what my father said. Don't believe everything you read in the press. But if you pick a newspaper up, try and find me anywhere within the article that says, oh, by the way, we made this story up. They don't. So
well, what journalist is ever going to admit that they've made a story up?
You've got to start with the premise that it's all fake.
Andrew, what you do is, if you think that a journalist has made a story up, then you read around it. You go to other sources to check it out. Yes. And if you come to the conclusion that it's made up, then you complain to the editor.
Well, but Ian, you're saying that to read round the subject, we are told to avoid sites where, the inverted commas, they are pushing fake news or conspiracy.
Well, I have come to the conclusion that Russia Today is a propaganda channel, so I don't bother watching it. Now, you might think differently. That's you're entitled to.
Stop watching the BBC and stop watching ITN and stop watching Sky, because they're all propaganda channels.
No, they're not.
Yes, they are. They're pushing their own agendas.
And what agendas are those?
Well, they're only feeding us information that they want us to have. It's as simple as that.
All news is subjective in a way, because, I mean, all newsreaders, if they write their own news bulletins, of course it's subjective, because they're choosing which stories to cover in the news bulletin. So I'll go along with you as far as that goes. But if you're saying to me that the BBC or Sky have a particular agenda that they push to the exclusion of everything else, I'd love to know what that agenda is.
So would I. But
if you can't tell me what it is, how can you accuse them of having one?
Right. So let me give you an example. Well, there's a whole lot of atrocity going on in Somalia. There's a whole lot of atrocity going on in the Yemen, and yet we don't cover stories like that.
Yes, we do. I covered the Somalia story the other day on CNN. We've covered the Yemen.
BBC. I said BBC and Sky. I didn't say you.
Well, I've seen stories on both of those on BBC and Sky.
Not on mainstream news, there aren't.
Yes, there are.
I watch the news at 10 o'clock.
And you've never seen anything about Yemen on the 10 o'clock news?
No, I didn't say that. Not recently. Not recently, I haven't. No.
Well, maybe there hasn't been a particular development in the last week.
We cover stories where there is an agenda for the West to actually gain some political mileage out of it, where there is oil as opposed to human...
Do you really think that journalists in newsrooms up and down this country say to themselves, right, we're only going to cover a story because it's to the advantage of the West? You're in cloud cuckoo land if you believe that.
I think editors do that. I wouldn't necessarily say that journalists do, but then journalists write stories and editors spike them. And the spiked stories cover human interest.
Have you actually got any experience of working in the media, Andrew?
I have experience of being bathed in it all my life, and being able to make up my own mind.
But you've never worked in the media, because obviously I do work in the media, and you can think I'm lying to you if you want for whatever agenda I might or might not have. But I have never seen that. Andrew, will you listen? I have never... Oh, what's the point? What is the point? If somebody isn't actually willing to listen to what you're saying, what is the point?
Britain is calling on Brussels to step back from a trade war that is about to loom between us in Europe and the United States of America after President Trump imposed new tariff imports on EU goods, which include a whopping 25% on steel originating from this side of the Atlantic. Is this all proof that there really is no special relationship? 0345 60 60973 is the number to call. And Maajid wants to speak to us from Peterborough. Tell us what you think, Maajid.
Hello, mate. Listen, pal, I do like you, but what I'm going to say is you just talked the biggest load of rubbish I've heard for a long, long time. And
tell us why, Maajid.
Okay, we have slagged President Trump off at every single turn. Our politicians, the Mayor of London, you name it, we ain't got a good word to say about him.
That's not true, Maajid. That's not true. Who are you speaking about? Who's the we here before you carry on?
The we, Mr. Khan, the Mayor of London, Mr. Corbyn.
So that's not we, is it, Maajid? That's not we. That's Labour.
Well, John Bercow's not Labour, is he?
Yeah, but it doesn't. But when you say we, you're talking as if everyone in the country's doing that. I can name you people on this radio station that defend Trump. I don't know why you're playing victim, Maajid.
I know, because I listen to LBC all the time.
Maajid, why are you playing victim?
I'm not playing victim.
Right, so not everyone slags off Trump. That's just not true, is it, Maajid?
Give me the courtesy, please. I'm listening to...
No. Before you carry on, Maajid, this is not a platform for which you can just have an uninterrupted speech. I'm asking you to stand up an allegation you've already made before you make any other points. Now, you've just said everyone, we, all, attack Trump, and I'm suggesting to you that even on this radio station it's not true. There are people that regularly defend Trump, including Nigel Farage, who has a daily show on LBC. And so I'm wondering why you're playing victim, Maajid. Can you first, before you carry on, accept it's not true that everybody in this country attacks Trump?
Please listen to my argument. Thank you. Right. Does the EU put tariffs on goods that come in from America into the EU?
Maajid, before you ask me another question, respond to the point I just made. That's how a conversation works. Is it correct to say that everybody attacks Trump, or some people on LBC do and some people don't? When you said we, you spoke of everyone. So can you at least accept that point?
Okay. We've had politicians, we've had non-politicians, we've had presenters, we've had everybody slag off Donald Trump because of his hairstyle, his...
You just said everybody again. I've just said to you, there's people even on this show that don't do that. Why are you playing the victim? You know, it's so funny because people that are populist or defenders of Trump, they often talk about snowflakes. It's a regular refrain I hear them resort to when talking about people on the left. You're snowflakes, right? You can't take criticism. Oh, you're lily-livered. You're spineless. And yet, Maajid, you're sounding like a snowflake yourself. Not everybody criticises Trump here. It's just simply not true. And, you know, at the end of the day, you're playing the victim card if you set a conversation up with that. So for the first thing you're going to have to do is accept that as simply as an alternative fact. It's just not true, because we can't have a reasonable conversation with each other if you're going to set it up based upon a falsehood.
I apologise. Now, can we move on?
All right, there we go. Thank you.
Okay. Does the EU put tariffs on to goods that come from America into the EU? And what is the percentage? Please tell me that.
I don't know. You tell me. Educate me.
I can tell you, because it was on the TV the other night. Up to 25%, up to 20% on goods that come from America, that come into EU, are tariffed. And goods that come from the EU that go into America are 2.5%. So is that, would you say 2.5% and 20% is a balanced playing field?
No, I'd say tariffs need to come down on all sides. The solution to that, Maajid, is... Hold on, now let me ask you a question. The solution to that surely isn't to increase tariffs. The solution is to remove tariffs as much as we can. So the solution should be headed in the opposite direction, surely, Maajid.
Right, OK, but listen...
No, is that true or not? No, just a... Stop ignoring my questions, dude. I'm the host, you're the guest. If I ask you a question, respond. Otherwise, I do a madly and move on, as he did to what's his name, the MP, who wouldn't answer the question about why he said, why he told Putin to shut up and get lost. Yeah, Williamson. Look, if you're not going to answer a question, there's lots of other people I can speak to, Maajid. All right? Now, I'll ask again. Is the solution to that problem you've probably correctly identified, because I don't know what the percentages of tariffs are that we impose on the US, forgive me, but I'm sure someone on 84850 will text and tell me right now. But is the solution to that then for us to also jack up tariffs, or for all of us to try and reduce tariffs and move in that direction?
The solution is a compromise. But unfortunately, from previous presidents, there has been no compromise on the EU. It's been one way. Now you've got a guy who actually plays hardball. He actually does what he said. Whether you like him or not, he actually said when he was elected that's what he's going to do. It's been 2 years. The EU has not moved one iota on tariffs because they've been quite happy getting their own way for a long time, importing Mercedes, importing BMWs, all the rest of it, we get orange juice in return and peanut butter. So
we get more than that, Maajid. We get more than that.
And jeans, yes, we do. But the tariff situation is a one-way street, from 20% to 2.5%.
Yep.
So they haven't listened to him for two years while he's been saying, let's negotiate. So all of a sudden he said, well, okay, fair enough, boys. I'm now going to jack my prices up. And it's just like a supermarket. So he's going to jack his prices up. And there'll be a price also. The EU now will have to either negotiate with him and say, look, OK, let's come to a compromise, let's sort the tariffs out. If not, this will escalate. It's not going to be any good for anybody, but he is doing what he was supposed to do for the American people. He doesn't give a damn about anybody else.
Yeah, OK, but Maajid, what do you give a damn about? I forget what Trump cares about, because of course he's going to do what he thinks is right. But I'm having a conversation with Maajid from Peterborough. Maajid from Peterborough isn't an American citizen, is he?
No, I'm a British citizen.
Right, so what do you care about, Maajid?
I want out of Europe, mate. That's what I want.
Yeah, but no, Maajid, answer the question I asked you. Yes, when it comes to world trade, what do you care about?
World trade, at the moment, actually I care about, if I can get me food on time, the wife's going to cook me curry tonight.
World trade, that's not what... Maajid, you see, this is what am I dealing with here? Thank you very much, Maajid. You can go now. Thank you very much. I ask you a question about world trade, and you say you want to get your food on time tonight. That's not world trade, Maajid. And that's my point here, that I did you the courtesy of giving you a long time to explain your views, but if you're going to just play games, then I'm going to move on, because that's not courteous. That's not how you have a conversation with people. Right, Anthony from Newport, tell us what you think.
Hello. I was going to pick up a point about the tariffs on the cars going back and forth from... I mean, America, they charge 2.5% on BMWs, Mercedes. Europe charge 10% tariffs on American cars. Like, Trump's been talking since Trump stopped put tariffs on Chinese steel. He's been talking with Europe to make a better deal, because when he was elected that he was going to sort out all the bad deals the previous president made, and he's been trying to do that. He's been knocking his head against Brussels, and now he's had to do something.
So I'll ask you, Anthony, as I asked the...
he's right.
I'll ask you, as I asked the rather impassioned caller we just had, that if you think there's an unfair relationship when it comes to tariffs between America and this side of the Atlantic, including the EU, but also Britain, if you think it's unfair, is the solution to start jacking up tariffs, or try and move the direction the other way and start lowering tariffs, all of us together?
Well, if you've got a bad deal, it's a bad deal. Like, I mean, you can't say, all right, then we're not going to move. Like, so we just ignore it and carry on as we go, and then we'll just get ripped off. You're gonna have to do something until, and eventually.
So you're happy that the British economy is going to suffer by Trump doing what he's just done because you support Trump?
No, I don't support Trump. 10-minute walk across my fields is old Lamworm Steelworks. My mates work down there. I understand where they're going, but if they are having a bad deal, if he was having a bad deal, we want to do something about it.
So you are, but this is what I'm saying, Anthony. You're defending something Trump's doing, and I'm wondering why. Because, like the previous caller, you're not an American citizen. It's not in your interest. So why are you arguing against your own interests?
I would like to see fair trade around the world.
Yeah.
But when you get blocks of people who's demanding tariffs to line their own pockets, and in certain level countries, it's wrong. I know America's big enough to stand up for itself, like, and they don't need me speaking up for them. But
which is why I'm wondering what you're doing, Anthony. You are from Newport, right? And you're defending the most powerful man in the world against your own interests, and I'm wondering why. Because you've conceded in this conversation that it's better for everybody that tariffs are lowered, not raised.
Yeah.
So why are you defending something that's against your interest and the interest of your country?
Well, Trump just wants a fair deal. Like, he's happy to drop tariffs. He's happy to put them up. If we're happy to drop tariffs, he will drop tariffs. If we are happy to do a fair deal with him, he'll have a fair deal with you.
Right. So as long as you and I both agree that's the direction it should head in, yeah? Not protectionism.
Not protectionism, but when you push it against a wall and you're knocking your head against that wall and no one's listening on the other side, what do you do in the end of the day? We'll stuff you.
Okay, so if you and I agree that protectionism isn't the way forward, and actually we should be negotiating lower tariffs between us and the United States, how do you think that's possible if we have a weaker bargaining hand?
Well, we know we got bargain in hand.
Well, currently we're members of the largest trading bloc in the world, but we're going to leave that soon, yeah?
No, it's just connect. You know, they're useless. That's why we voted out, like, because they are just useless.
Who's useless?
German cars, French wine, and Italian tomatoes. They're not interested in Britain. They're not interested in America. They're not interested in China. They're not interested in the world. They're just interested in themselves. And when
somebody could say that about you, Anthony.
Yeah,
and that's just ad hominem, isn't it? That doesn't. There's no way of me standing that up or disproving it because it's just it's a wild accusation.
Well,
is that how we have conversation these days? Just make wild accusations and hope it sticks.
I'm 50 years old now. I've been.
Yeah, Anthony, if you're 50 years old, then you don't need me telling you that if you've got two kids having an argument, one says he's never going to like me because he just hates me and they're brothers. How on earth are you going to solve that? Apart from saying to the kid, he doesn't hate you. Stop thinking badly of him. You know, your siblings. You have to work out a way to live together. Now, you've just said the French, the Germans, and the Italians don't care about us. They only care about themselves. There's nothing I can say to that, Anthony.
No, because you know it's true.
Because I know it's true.
Go on, then. Tell me when they've done a good deal for us. Like, why are we paying 10% tariffs on American cars?
Actually, this is not how to have it. We can't converse like this, my friend. There's no way you can send out a wild accusation. There's no way I can counter because I can't tell you the Italians love us. Because then we have a silly conversation about whether what's in the hearts of the Italians and the Germans towards us. There's no way we can have a conversation like that.
I love the Europeans. I was over in France for a long time. Like, you know, they're brilliant people. Like, sometimes better than people I live next door to. Like, if you know what I mean. I got nothing against the people. It's just the organisation of Brussels.
Yeah.
It's a protective bloc, and they're just looking after themselves.
Well, it's a trade bloc, Anthony. All right. Okay, we've got to move on. John from Lewisham, speak to us.
Why?
John, you're on air.
Maajid, I just wanted to say two things, yeah?
Sure.
I think personally Trump is doing what a normal prime minister would do for his country. He's not elected to serve the whole world, he's elected to serve his country. So he's been getting an unfair deal for a long period of time. And then
an unfair deal?
Yeah, well...
Did you just hear anything I just said, John?
Yeah.
Were you listening?
Yeah.
What did I say?
Quite a few things.
Did you hear what I just said, John, about the fact that there are disparities on both sides in our relationship with American trade, which was negotiated historically and mutually agreed upon?
Yeah, I kind of see where you're coming from, but when he was campaigning for his election, that's not what he told he's going to do, and he's just doing what he said he's going to do.
Yeah, that's right. That's different. You're not American, though, are you, John? What are you? What are you, John?
No, I'm British.
Right. So as a Brit, who this is going to negatively affect...
Yep.
Are you more concerned about your prices going up or on Donald Trump sticking to a pledge that he supposedly made in his election?
I think for me as a Brit, I'm more worried about us making our money in the rightful way.
Right, and what's the rightful way? If not, John, wait, John, hold on, let me ask you a question, John. If you and I negotiated something 10 years ago, if I agreed, say you were my landlord and I was the tenant, and 10 years ago I agreed to pay you, let's say, £100 a week rent,
right.
And then prices went up around you over the course of those 10 years, but we stuck to our original agreement. Is it fair that 10 years later, without negotiating with me again, you basically barge into the flat and say, oi, now it's £1,000 a month. And I say to you, but dude, we agreed on all this 10 years ago and we have a contract. Here's the contract. Or would you have to renegotiate a new tenancy contract with me?
Well, the first thing I'm thinking is this: he didn't just say overnight yesterday that the tariffs are going up. He announced that he's going to be looking at this a while ago.
Yes, he did, but we agreed all of this with the Americans in what used to be the World Trade Organization, John.
Okay. Let's take your analogy with the landlord thing again.
Yep.
Obviously, the price has gone up. I, the landlord, come up to you and say, listen, I'm struggling with the prices. We're going to need to look at this.
You can only do it when my tenancy is up for renewal, John. That's the only time you can do it, because we have a contract.
Well, then I'm sure there should be some world body that will find him for that. But if not, then, you know, I just think it's unfair for us to keep always wanting to be making money
from...
No, but John, you just completely... I just gave examples where they impose tariffs on us. They are also imposing tariffs. No, hold on. There's inequality on both sides. That's my point, John. 9% on our chocolate, 20% on our key milk products, 25% on our small trucks. That's coming from their end. Yes, on our end, there's an inequality that we're imposing higher taxes on their cars, right? So there's an inequality on both sides because historically, when the world was a smaller place, we all agreed this with the Americans. The world's changed since then. Now, what Trump's saying is, I want a new deal. We're saying, yeah, OK, let's go back to the negotiating table and renegotiate a new deal. What you can't do is just whack on tariffs, because that's called a trade war, John, and that's not good for anyone. All right, June from Lowestoft, tell us what you think.
Well, I think I like Mr. Trump. I think he's great. One thing you've got to remember is, Maajid, he's a businessman. He puts business first to run the country and do the job.
Well, it's true he's a businessman, and I suspect with games he's playing with North Korea are an indication of the art of the deal that he believes he can strike. But explain in your mind, June, how it works here in this case.
Well, for me personally, Maajid, I look at it like this. Now, you know that I represent the fishing industry, and if only our government woke up and done their job like Mr. Trump, we can bring all that fish back. And what do we need, Maajid? What do we need built? We need ships, because we've cut all ours up, because the Dutch took all ours. So we've cut all our boats. So we now need steel to replenish our shipping. We need shipbuilding again in this country. We're lazy. These politicians have not got a clue about business. I'm afraid to say it, but they haven't. So in my opinion, I feel so sorry. I watched a documentary type of thing with a little Welsh guy on there this morning, and I sympathise with him because that's what we have in the fishing industry every day of the week.
So politicians are clueless, but we're lazy. So how do you think, June, that considering our politicians are clueless and that we're lazy, after Brexit happens, how do you think we're going to get any better at negotiating with the clout and the might of the US economy?
Well, I don't know, not quite yet. I mean, maybe the government will have to change, have a shift about.
Do you know, June, you know what? Let me break it down in my mind. This is how it works, OK? If you've got a large group of friends and you're facing off against another large group of friends, you're protected. But if you offend that large group of friends and tell them that you don't like them and walk away from them and then try and face off another large group of friends, you're left on your own. Now, no one's going to help you. Isn't that what we just did with Brexit?
No, I'm not going to get into all the Brexit thing. This is about Trump and steel.
Yeah, and but no, June, June, hold on. I'm getting into it because Trump... We were led to believe that we have a special relationship with America, and after Brexit, we will have our own trade deals with America. And what's just happened to me indicates that we don't have the clout to separately negotiate with America. If even as members of the EU we can't have that successful negotiation, how on earth are we going to do it alone? It looks to me like we're going to lose from both ends, June.
Well, no, we're not. Can't you see what that guy...
I can't, no, so I'm asking you to explain it to me.
He's doing our Prime Minister's job. He's telling that EU and that lot there, no, you're not going to mess me about. I'm going to fight for my country. Yeah. Once we come out of the EU, he will help us.
Why? But you just heard from Anders in Vienna. Like, how will he help us? He's got no reason to help us. Why would he help us?
Oh, well, hang on a minute, Maajid. Don't you think we should help ourselves? Get off our backs.
No, but you just said he will help us. I'm asking you. I'm not telling you what I think.
Well, I think he will.
Why? Why would he help us?
He's great. Pardon?
Why would he? Why would he help us?
Because they are our greatest ally. He's half British.
Yeah, but he just told us he's whacking a 25% on our steel. How is he our greatest ally?
Well, at the moment he is. He's making them wake up. He's clever. Maajid is clever. Look at the guy. You must give him some credit.
June, I can assure you, I've done an entire show on giving him credit where credit is due, especially over his foreign policy, right? So I'm honestly trying to understand this particular case, which is how on earth we think we're deluding ourselves, surely, if we think that we can negotiate great trade deals as a tiny country if we can't even do it as part of the largest trade bloc in the world.
Well, we're going to have to restart doing these things, aren't we? We used to do, and used to be very good at it. This is the thing, Maajid. We don't do anything anymore. I'll give you an example. I work with all these wind farms, right? You know these wind farms.
Yeah. Well,
we just built all the wind farms in our North Sea with cheap Chinese steel.
Yeah.
Just had SSE. They've just had to have that all replaced.
But you know what I'd argue? I'd argue that free trade needs to begin with free countries, and so I'm more worried about the Western Hemisphere starting a trade war with itself, not necessarily China, June. But June, do you know what the date is today?
June the 2nd or 3rd? I'm not.
It's the 1st of June. June. There we are. It's a day for you. All right, June. Take care. Lovely to speak to you, June. There from Lowestoft.
I know he's a moron.